I never thought of myself as a cruel man. If anyone had asked me before that day, I would have said I was a good husband, a devoted one, the kind who worked hard, who provided, who loved his wife without hesitation. But now, standing in the dim light of my office, staring at the evidence of her betrayal, I realized something. I wasn't a good man anymore. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be. The images on my phone screen told a story I hadn't asked to be a part of. My wife, Laura, lying on a massage table, her body relaxed in the dimly lit room. The man standing over her, hands pressing into her skin, leaning too close. The next few pictures were worse. They didn't leave room for doubt. The messages I found afterwards sealed it. It wasn't just a one-time thing. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, a choice she had made over and over again. While I sat across from her at dinner, held her at night, dreamed of our future. I should have confronted her immediately, should have thrown the phone in her face and demanded answers. But I didn't. I sat down, breathed in, breathed out, and I waited. Because if I had learned anything in my life, it was this: revenge was best served cold. The days passed in a haze of carefully measured smiles and quiet observations. Laura moved through our home as if nothing had changed, completely unaware that I knew everything. I played my part well. I kissed her good night, held her hand, listened to her stories. All the while, the storm inside me grew, dark and unrelenting. And then fate gave me the final piece of the puzzle. I had gone to the doctor for a routine checkup, expecting nothing more than the usual list of health recommendations. But the test results that came back were anything but routine. "You cannot have children," the doctor had said, the words cutting through me like a blade. "I'm sorry, but you never could. Never." The air had left my lungs. My mind raced, my thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of disbelief and cold realization. I had always assumed that the difficulty Laura and I faced in conceiving was just that, difficulty. A struggle that time and effort would eventually overcome. But now I knew the truth. And with it came another, even more horrifying one. Laura was pregnant. She had told me just 2 nights before, her eyes filled with nervous excitement, hands clutching mine as she whispered the words I had once dreamed of hearing. "I'm pregnant." And I had smiled. I had kissed her. I had told her I was happy. Because in that moment, something inside me had snapped into place. She thought she could lie to me. She thought she could betray me and still have everything. My love, my trust, my life. She thought I would be overjoyed by her news, blind to the obvious. But I wasn't blind anymore. I was wide awake, and I was going to make sure she suffered for every single lie. I spent the next few days watching her, studying every movement, every flicker of guilt she tried to bury under the guise of joy. She thought she had fooled me, that she had gotten away with it. But she didn't know that every time she smiled, every time she touched her stomach as if she were carrying my child, she was feeding the fire inside me. She was careful, though. Too careful. She didn't mention the pregnancy to anyone else yet. She wanted to wait, she said, to make sure everything was safe. But I knew the truth. She was afraid. Afraid of what I might suspect. Afraid of what I might do. And she was right to be. At night, when she slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake planning. Revenge wasn't something to rush. No, it had to be precise. Oh, absolute. The first step was confirmation. I needed proof that the child wasn't mine. Proof beyond my own sterility. And so I did what any man in my position would do. I played the devoted husband. I suggested we visit a private clinic for a full prenatal checkup. Just to be sure everything is perfect, I told her, my voice dripping with concern. She hesitated, her eyes darting away. But what excuse could she give? She nodded, forcing a smile, and agreed. The clinic visit was uneventful, at least for her. She thought it was a simple checkup, but I had made special arrangements. A quiet conversation with the doctor, a discreet DNA test arranged without her knowing. All I had to do was wait. In the meantime, I set the second phase of my plan in motion. Laura had always been careful with her phone, but not careful enough. Late at night, while she was in the shower, I accessed it. Her messages with him were still there, months of secrets spelled out in sickening detail. Promises, plans, words of love. I should have felt pain, should have felt the weight of betrayal crush me. But I felt nothing. I forwarded everything to my personal account, ensuring I had every piece of evidence I needed. Then I deleted my traces, placed the phone exactly where she had left it, and waited for her to emerge from the bathroom, oblivious to what I had done. The next morning, the results came in. I didn't read them immediately. I didn't have to. I already knew what they would say. Instead, I folded the papers neatly, placed them in my drawer, and went downstairs, where Laura was humming softly, making breakfast as if she were still the woman I once loved. She turned when she saw me, smiling. "Good morning," she said, oblivious. I smiled back. "Morning," I replied. And just like that, the final piece of my plan fell into place. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that her perfect little world was about to crumble. And I intended to enjoy every second of it. Patience was key. I had to be careful, calculated. If I rushed, I would lose the satisfaction of watching everything unravel exactly the way I wanted. Laura moved through the next few days in blissful ignorance, completely unaware that her fate had already been sealed. She still touched her stomach absent-mindedly, still looked at me with forced happiness, pretending nothing had changed. It made me sick. I began planting seeds of doubt, subtle, almost imperceptible. I started coming home later than usual, making vague excuses about work. I watched as unease flickered across her face, as she tried to gauge whether I knew something. One night, I pretended to be asleep and waited. At 2:14 a.m., I heard her phone vibrate. I had turned off my back to her, so she thought I wouldn't notice when she reached for it. But I could feel the way the mattress shifted as she moved, could hear the soft rustle of fabric as she picked it up. A long silence. Text. Then another. I waited. After a few minutes, she carefully set the phone back down, exhaled softly, and lay back down beside me. I gave it another 10 minutes before I moved. Silently, I turned over, reaching for her phone with careful precision. My hands were steady as I unlocked it. Her passcode hadn't changed. There it was. Him. His messages, their little secret conversations, their carefully crafted lies. I scrolled through them with a detached sort of amusement, watching how they danced around the reality of their betrayal, convinced that they were being careful. "You're sure he doesn't know?" That was his last message. Laura's response had been short. "He doesn't suspect a thing." I almost laughed out loud. I placed the phone back, turned onto my back, and stared at the ceiling, the rage inside me simmering into something colder. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I was going to make her believe she had truly won. Over the next week, I became the perfect husband. Attentive, caring. I brought her small gifts, made her favorite meals, kissed her forehead when she least expected it. And Laura? She grew comfortable. She let down her guard. She smiled more, convinced that whatever paranoia she had felt before was just in her head, that she had truly gotten away with it. And that was exactly what I wanted. Then, when she least expected it, I made my move. I sent him a message from her phone. "Meet me at the house on Friday. Ryan will be gone for the weekend." Then I deleted it from her sent folder, ensuring she wouldn't see it. I imagined his excitement when he saw it. Imagined the anticipation. But when Friday came, it wasn't Laura who would be waiting for him. It would be me. And I would make sure that neither of them would ever forget it. Friday arrived, and I had never felt calmer in my life. Laura had no idea what was coming. She thought I was leaving for a weekend trip, a convenient excuse I had fed her days prior. She had smiled, kissed my cheek, and told me to have fun. I could see the relief in her eyes. She thought she had won. By early evening, I left the house as planned, or so she believed. I drove around aimlessly, giving her time to relax, to fully believe that I was gone. Then, as night fell, I returned. The house was dark when I parked a block away and walked back on foot. Silent, waiting. I entered through the back door, the key turning smoothly in the lock. My heartbeat remained steady, my breathing slow. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was ready. From the kitchen, I heard movement upstairs. Laura was getting ready. For him. A few minutes passed, and then I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I stayed in the shadows unseen. The engine cut off, and a moment later, the front door opened. I had left it unlocked for him. He stepped inside cautiously, as if worried about being caught, but the anticipation outweighed his fear. I let him take a few steps in before I shut the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house, loud and final. He froze. Slowly he turned, and when his eyes met mine, I saw it, the realization. They're going somewhere, I asked, my voice unnervingly even. His face paled. Ryan. I tilted my head, studying him like an insect beneath my shoe. He wasn't impressive. Nothing about him was remarkable. And yet Laura had chosen this. I almost pitied him. Almost. Laura's upstairs, I continued, my voice calm. She's been waiting for you. He swallowed hard, shifting on his feet as if preparing to run. But I had locked the door, and there was nowhere to go. I took a step forward. He took one back. I smiled. Good. You seem nervous, I said. Why is that? His hands twitched at his sides. Look, man. I didn't. You didn't what? I interrupted, my tone sharper now. You didn't think you'd get caught? You didn't think she would ever have to face the consequences of what she's done? I could see the sweat forming on his brow. You think I don't know everything? I continued, my voice growing colder. I know Jason. I know about the texts, the messages, the hotel room. I know. He flinched at the name. I wanted him to. I took another step forward, and he took another back, his heel catching on the edge of the rug. He stumbled slightly, his confidence crumbling with each passing second. You thought you could walk into my house? I asked. Take my wife? Raise my child? His eyes flickered with confusion. He didn't know. He hadn't known. Realization dawned on his face, followed by something else. Fear. It was delicious. He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't have kids. I chuckled, low and humorless. No, Jason. I can't. His mouth opened, then closed. I could see the gears turning in his head, the way the weight of what he had done finally settled on him. But it was too late. Much too late. I leaned in slightly, just enough to see the panic in his eyes. That baby, the one Laura is carrying, it isn't mine. He exhaled shakily. Ryan. No, I cut him off. You don't get to say my name. You don't get to act like this is some kind of mistake. You knew what you were doing. And now, I smiled. You're going to pay for it. He made a sudden move, quick, desperate. But I was faster. My hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. His breath left him in a choked gasp, and for a moment he struggled. Weak, pathetic. I let him flail. Let him panic. Let him feel it. Then, slowly, I leaned in. This is just the beginning, I whispered. Then I let go. He stumbled forward, coughing, his face contorted with panic. You're insane, he wheezed. I smiled. Get out, I said simply. He didn't hesitate. He scrambled toward the door, hands fumbling with the lock before he finally managed to open it. He bolted into the night, disappearing into the darkness like the coward he was. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then, slowly, I turned toward the stairs. Laura was still waiting for him. But it wouldn't be Jason she would find. It would be me. And she would wish it had been him. I climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately. I wanted her to feel it, to sense something was wrong before she even saw me. The hallway was dim, the soft glow of the bedroom light spilling out from beneath the door. I could hear movement inside. She was getting ready for him. I stepped closer. Through the slight crack in the doorway, I saw her reflection in the vanity mirror. She was smiling, her lips painted red, the way she used to when she wanted to impress me. A silk robe hung loosely around her body, her hair cascading down her shoulders, styled to perfection. She thought tonight was going to be special. She had no idea. I pushed the door open. She turned, still smiling. But the moment she saw me, the color drained from her face. She hadn't heard me come in. Her hands gripped the edge of the vanity, knuckles turning white. Ryan, she stammered, forcing a weak laugh. You're back early. I said nothing. She glanced toward the bedside table, her phone, her lifeline. But I had already taken care of that. I had removed it the moment I stepped inside the house. There would be no interruptions tonight. She swallowed hard, trying to regain control. I was just getting ready for bed, she said quickly, as if that would explain the effort she had put into her appearance. as if that would erase the truth. I tilted my head slightly, watching her. She was unraveling. "Where's Jason?" I asked finally. Her breath hitched, just for a second. A flicker of panic. She tried to hide it. She failed. She hesitated. "Jason." I let the silence stretch between us, let her sit in the weight of her own lies. "You were expecting him," I continued, my voice eerily calm. "Weren't you?" She shook her head rapidly. "No, Ryan, what are you talking about?" I took a step forward. She took one back. "I know everything," I said. The room fell silent. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I could see the fear in her eyes now, the way her mind was racing to find an escape. "There's no use lying," I continued, my voice growing colder. "I know about the messages, the meetings, the baby." Tears welled in her eyes. "Ryan, please. Whose child is it?" I asked. She flinched as if I had struck her. Her lips trembled, her body shaking now. I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear her say it. She closed her eyes, her breath ragged. "It's not yours," she whispered. There it was, the final, bitter truth. Something inside me cracked, but I refused to let it show. I inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the neatly folded envelope. The DNA results. I placed them on the vanity table beside her, watching as her hands trembled when she reached for them. She unfolded the papers, her eyes scanning the words that confirmed what we both already knew. Then she broke. A sob tore from her throat, her knees buckling beneath her. She sank to the floor, clutching the papers as if they could somehow change reality. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she wept. I crouched down beside her, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it did." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "I love you," she choked out. "It was a mistake. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." I let out a breath of amusement. "A mistake?" I echoed. "No, Laura. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. This was a choice." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. "I can fix this," she pleaded, grabbing my hand. "We can fix this." I let her hold on for a moment. Let her believe there was still hope. Then slowly I pulled away. "You're wrong," I said, her face twisted in anguish. "Please." I stood, looking down at the broken woman before me. "This marriage is over." The words left my mouth with finality. Her sobs filled the room, but I turned away. I walked out the door, down the stairs, and into the cold night air. I had delivered the first blow, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Laura and Jason had destroyed my life. Now I was going to destroy theirs. The house was no longer a home. Laura moved through it like a ghost, her eyes hollow, her once perfect posture now slumped beneath the weight of her choices. She tried to talk to me, tried to beg for another chance, but I gave her nothing. Not my words, not my anger, not even my hatred. Just silence. And that silence was driving her insane. She knew it was coming, though she didn't know when. That was the beauty of it. The uncertainty, the waiting. She was like a prisoner anticipating execution, but instead of an exact hour, all she had was the creeping knowledge that her world was about to collapse. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, the paranoia, the suffocating doubt, the fear of the unknown. So I took my time. The first thing I did was let the truth slip out. Not to her, of course. That would be too easy. Instead, I let it unravel naturally, the way she had unraveled my trust. It started small. A casual comment to a mutual friend. A carefully placed conversation where just the right person could overhear. And from there, the whispers began to spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, Laura's phone was constantly buzzing. Her friends, our friends, were calling, texting, asking questions she didn't know how to answer. She tried to do damage control, but it was too late. People knew. And once people knew, the illusion of her perfect life began to crack. Then came Jason. After our confrontation, he had gone into hiding, likely assuming that if he ignored the situation, it would go away. But I wasn't done with him yet. I had been patient long enough. I sent him an email, short, direct. "You ruined my life. Now it's my turn. I attached the DNA results, the messages, the pictures. Then I hit send. I didn't have to wait long. Jason's response was immediate. A frantic, desperate call. I let it ring. Then another. And another. I answered on the fourth. His voice was panicked. Ryan, man, listen, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know she was pregnant. I smiled at the desperation in his tone. Now you do. I can fix this, he stammered. We can figure something out. There is no we, Jason, I said, my voice dangerously low. This is your mess now. He exhaled sharply, struggling to find words. What you going to do? I let the silence stretch, just long enough for his mind to spiral. Then I hung up. Let him wonder. Let him panic. Let him break. But I wasn't done yet. I made sure his employer got an anonymous email. Attached were a few select messages between him and Laura, just enough to raise suspicion about his moral integrity. Jason worked in a high-profile firm, one that valued reputation above all else. And soon that reputation would crumble. Laura, on the other hand, had no idea what I had done. Not yet. But she would, because the next phase of my plan was already in motion. I had contacted a lawyer the day after I found out the truth. I had every piece of evidence I needed, her infidelity, the proof of the child's paternity, the emotional distress she had caused. I wouldn't just divorce her. I would make sure she left with nothing. Laura was unraveling. She could feel it, the walls closing in, the weight of her lies crushing her piece by piece. And I made sure she felt every second of it. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I just watched. And that silence, that unbearable, suffocating silence, it destroyed her faster than any shouting match ever could. By now, she knew people were talking. The calls from friends had become less frequent, their texts shorter, colder. The sympathy she had expected never came, because no one pitied the woman who had betrayed the man who had given her everything. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. One evening, I came home and found her sitting on the edge of our bed, her hands gripping a piece of paper so tightly that it had begun to crumple. She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes filled with unshed tears. It was the divorce papers. I had left them on the kitchen counter, where I knew she would see them the moment she walked in. She had expected this, but expecting something and facing it were two very different things. She opened her mouth to speak, but I turned away before she could. I heard her breath hitch. She wasn't used to being ignored. That night, I heard her crying in the guest bedroom. Soft, broken sobs that once would have shattered me. But now, they meant nothing. She had made her bed. Now she would lie in it. Jason, on the other hand, was spiraling in a different way. The rumors at his workplace had spread like wildfire. People whispered when he walked by, exchanged knowing glances when he entered a room. He tried to act unaffected, but I knew better. I had seen the cracks forming. And then, just when he thought it couldn't get worse, it did. I made sure of it. It was easy, really. A carefully crafted anonymous tip to his firm's HR department, suggesting a conflict of interest, an affair with a married woman, a child on the way. Attached were the emails, the text, the proof. His company had a strict code of conduct. Image was everything. Jason was placed on leave within a week. I could only imagine the look on his face when he got the news. The panic. The desperation. I wish I could have seen it. Laura, of course, had no idea that Jason was falling apart alongside her. She still held on to hope. Hope that she could fix this. Hope that I would forgive her. She didn't realize that forgiveness was never an option. That was why, when I finally spoke to her again, she clung to every word like it was oxygen. Sign the papers, I said simply, standing in the doorway of the guest room. She looked up at me, her face streaked with dried tears. Ryan, please. I stared at her, unblinking. I'm not asking, I said. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pen. She had no fight left. Not anymore. And when she finally signed her name at the bottom of the page, I exhaled. It was over. But her suffering, that was just beginning. Laura thought the worst was over. Signing the divorce papers had broken her. That much was obvious. She had moved through the house like a shadow afterward, waiting for some sign of mercy. some hint that I might reconsider. She didn't understand. This wasn't about separation. This was about destruction. The moment she signed her name, the real consequences began. First, the financial ruin. I had planned for this from the start. Every dollar, every asset, we had built everything together, but I had been the one keeping track. And with my evidence of her infidelity, the court sided with me without hesitation. I got the house. I got the savings. I got everything. Laura, on the other hand, she got nothing. She tried to fight it, of course. She tried to argue that she had been a wife, that she had contributed to this life we had built. But the judge wasn't interested in her excuses. She had cheated. She had lied. And now she would pay. She had nowhere to go. Her friends, once so close, had distanced themselves. The sympathetic smiles had faded. Now, when they looked at her, all they saw was a woman who had thrown everything away. She stayed in the house for a few more weeks, as if trying to pretend that things could go back to normal. But eventually, reality caught up with her. And one evening, I found her standing by the front door, a single suitcase at her feet. She turned when she heard me, her face tired, defeated. "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered. I said nothing. She inhaled shakily. "Do you even care?" I met her gaze, my voice devoid of emotion. "No." Her breath hitched. For a moment, I thought she might try to argue, to plead. But she didn't. She simply nodded, wiped her eyes, and walked out the door. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. She was gone, and I had one. But there was still one loose end to tie up. Jason. I had taken his peace of mind, his job. Now I would take his future. The final piece of my revenge was already in motion. Jason had spent the last few weeks trying to salvage what was left of his reputation, clinging to whatever dignity he had left. But I had no intention of letting him rebuild. With one last, well-placed phone call, I ensured that his world would collapse completely. His company didn't just fire him. They blacklisted him. His name was dragged through the mud in the industry, whispers of his unprofessional conduct, ensuring that no firm would take the risk of hiring him. He had lost everything. Laura, his job, his future. And when he finally realized that there was nothing left, that was the moment I had been waiting for. One evening, my phone rang. I recognized the number instantly. Jason. I let it ring. Then, at the very last second, I answered. He was breathing heavily on the other end, his voice shaking. "Ryan, please." I get it, okay? You win. Just stop." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. Then I smiled. "You have nothing left," I said. "And that's exactly what you deserve." He made a broken sound, a mixture of frustration, desperation, and something close to defeat. "Why?" he whispered. "Why are you doing this?" I exhaled slowly, savoring the moment. "Because you took everything from me," I said simply. "And now, I've taken everything from you." Then I hung up, and just like that, my revenge was complete. The silence was different now. Not the kind that weighed me down, suffocating me in doubt and betrayal. No, this silence was light, free. Laura was gone. Jason was ruined. Everything I had set out to do, I had done. And yet, standing in the empty house, I felt something I hadn't expected. Emptiness. For months, I had been driven by one goal: make them pay. Every move I made, every decision, had been carefully calculated to ensure they lost everything. And they had. Laura was staying in a tiny apartment on the other side of town, scraping by with whatever job she could find. The woman who once lived a life of comfort now struggled to make rent. Jason had disappeared completely. No job, no prospects. The last I heard, he had left town, desperate for a fresh start somewhere else. I had won, but victory felt hollow. I sat in the living room, staring at the divorce papers. The ink had long since dried, the finality of it all sealed with a judge's signature. I had gotten everything I wanted. So why did it still feel like something was missing? A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, I found myself staring into a familiar pair of eyes. Laura's mother. She looked at me with something between sadness and understanding. She had always been kind to me, always treated me like a son. And now standing there, she looked as if she didn't quite know what to say. "She's not doing well," she said after a long pause. I stayed silent. She sighed, shaking her head. "I'm not here to make excuses for her. What she did was wrong. But she's still my daughter. And she's lost." I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening on the doorframe. "She made her choice," I said, my voice even. "I know," she murmured. "And now she's paying for it. But, Ryan, how much is enough?" I inhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "What do you want from me?" She studied me for a long moment. "Forgive her." I almost laughed. "Forgiveness? After everything?" I shook my head. "That's not possible." She nodded, as if she expected that answer. "Then at least stop punishing her." I exhaled sharply, running a hand down my face. "I'm not punishing her. She did this to herself." "I know," she said again. "But at some point, you have to let it go." Let it go. The words stuck in my head long after she left. Could I? Should I? I wasn't sure. Because as much as I had destroyed Laura's life, I wasn't sure if I had repaired my own. Time moved forward, whether I was ready for it or not. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of before. It was just empty. And for the first time in a long time, I had no one left to fight. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Laura was still struggling, but I had stopped watching, stopped caring. Her mother's words had settled deep in my mind, even when I tried to ignore them. How much was enough? I had spent so much time ensuring she suffered, ensuring Jason suffered, that I hadn't stopped to ask what came after. I got my answer one afternoon when I saw Laura again. It wasn't planned. I was out running errands when I spotted her sitting alone at a cafe, staring into her cup like it held the meaning of life. She looked as small. Her hair wasn't as perfect as before, her clothes weren't designer, and her eyes, once so full of confidence, looked hollow. She didn't see me. For a long moment, I stood there, watching the woman I had once loved, the woman I had destroyed, and I realized something. She had already lost. I didn't need to punish her anymore. I had done enough. That night, I made a decision. I had my lawyer halt any further legal action against her. No more financial ruin, no more battles. The divorce was final, the damage was done. There was nothing left to fight over. It was time to let go. Jason, as far as I knew, was gone for good. And Laura? She would have to live with the consequences of her choices, but I would no longer be the one pulling the strings, because I had a life to rebuild. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was ready to start. I didn't need revenge anymore. I needed peace. And that was something Laura and Jason would never have. But I would. I had won. Not because I destroyed them, but because I had finally let them go. The war was over, and I was free. The end.